I am trustee Sue Dygard, and
Elizabeth Santos.
Elizabeth is the trustee representing District 1, and I am the trustee representing District 5. Our colleague Kendall Baker, who is also going to be joining us tonight, he texted earlier today and said he's sick, so he won't be here today. So, you want to just like alternate?
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
alternate. Somos la comunidad, tenemos estas juntas para poner el propósito de la mesa directiva de HISD. Y ella representa esta área aquí. Yo soy de Northside para el Distrito 1. So do you want me to go ahead and start here?
Yeah.
Well, I'll do both English and Spanish.
Yep.
So, so we're here to conduct a two-way communication and outreach with families and gather input feedback on the board goals. Las metas de la mesa directiva, queremos hablar con los padres de la comunidad, cómo mover el distrito adelante con nuestras metas de la mesa directiva. To better understand what the community wants to see in the next iteration of the board's goals, which guide the district's work. So, ya le dije que esto es para mover el distrito adelante.
So, a lot of people don't know what the HISD board is. We are the official policy-making body of the Houston Independent School District. There are 9 of us, elected from 9 separate districts, and we serve staggered 4-year terms. And the things, what the board does, think of us, we're at the top. Under us is the superintendent, then the administration, down to the principals, the teachers, so forth. And it's the board's job to set the goals of the district that reflect the vision and the values of the community. We hire and hold the superintendent accountable to achieve the goals. We approve the budget, we set the tax rate, and then we monitor the progress towards those goals.
La mesa directiva de HISD somos 9 en toda la ciudad y estamos aquí para hacer las metas del distrito y que los valores de nuestras comunidades. Conseguimos un superintendente y él es el que tiene que, él o ella es el que tiene que, how do you say, cumplir las metas y tenemos el propósito, el budget, el presupuesto que nosotros tenemos que pasar como una mesa directiva. Necesitamos 5 votos para aprobar
ellos aprueban el presupuesto.
Y durante el año, sí, somos los que estamos mirando que el superintendente está cumpliendo las metas y durante el año, cada vez que tenemos una junta. En tax rate, las taxas que la comunidad de HISD paga, nosotros somos las que we set it. ¿Cómo se dice set?
Deciden qué va a ser.
Decidimos qué tanto va a ser. Okay, so the superintendent develops and implements a strategic plan to achieve the goals set by the board.
He works for us.
Yeah, so we hire him, we evaluate him, and he's the one that does the day-to-day operation. So he's the one.
Él es el superintendente.
This is superintendent, yeah.
So he reports to you guys?
He reports to the board, correct.
So the day-to-day operations, everything that happens during the day, the running of the bus, HISD police, the nutrition services, the cafeteria, all of that, he manages all of that. And so what happens is he develops a budget and we approve that budget and we say, yes, this budget meets our goals or it doesn't meet our goals. Like this is what meets our values. If it doesn't meet our values, we give them feedback during the year in order to make sure that we put our money where our values are, and that's with our kids. We monitor progress towards the goals and adjust courses as needed. Sí. Okay, so you go for it.
So we tend to refer to these as board goals. I would say they're the district's goals. The board sets the district goals in collaboration with the superintendent. these goals are not separate and apart from the administration's goals. They should be one and the same. So the board sets the district's goals. And it is the Board of Education's mission to equitably educate the whole child so that every student graduates with the tools to reach their full potential. So I'm gonna dive a little, and
Okay,
this is my-
hold on.
oh,
So, la mente de la mesa directiva es en conjunto con el superintendente y la administración de él. Aquí dice que es son las metas de la mesa directiva, pero en realidad él es el que tiene que cumplir esas metas. Es como debe de decir nuestras metas. Y las metas están ahí para poder educar a todo el niño o niña, a nuestros estudiantes, y no solamente en leer, pero cumplir en hacerse emocional y social, y it's the global graduate which we moved away from, pero anyway, así estamos, y por eso estamos aquí con la comunidad para a ver qué ustedes quieren ver para nuestro futuro.
But our goals are focused on student outcome goals, what students know or can do, knowledge or skills. The goals are not whether buses are running on time, or which curriculum programs we should put in place, or how much we pay teachers. Those are all very important things, but those are actually inputs that support the goals. So we set these student outcome goals, and then the superintendent determines what the necessary inputs are to achieve these goals. And then we have 5-year student outcome goals, because if you're always changing your goal, you're never gonna achieve it. So we set them 5 years, and then a best practice in goal setting is to have anywhere from 1 to 5 goals. If you have too many goals, studies show you accomplish nothing. If you have 1 goal, you're more likely to accomplish it. If you have 3 goals, you're more likely to accomplish them. But when you kind of hit this point where you're too diffuse in your focus and you accomplish less of everything. And so right now we have 4 goals. We developed these goals with our previous superintendent, and we used a needs assessment and a root cause analysis to determine what those goals needed to be. Where are our children right now? Where are the biggest challenges? And identifying the highest need areas that would make the greatest impact. And these are the things that a superintendent must do. It doesn't mean you shouldn't make sure the buses are running on time. It doesn't mean that he's not focused on the whirlwind of daily operations, but it means these are the non-negotiable things that he must do. Do you want to share and we've got up here our 4 different goals?
Sí, lo que he dicho es que las metas son, si podemos enfocar si son 3 o menos, pero en nuestra mesa tenemos 4 y fueron implementadas con el superintendente antes de el que tenemos, y cada 5 años debemos de tener nuevas metas, y por eso tenemos que progress measure, ¿cómo se dice? Medir cada mes cómo está haciendo el superintendente con nuestras metas. So I just kind of summed up what you just said, Sue. You want to?
Yeah, sure. So we have 4 goals. One is around early childhood reading, because we know if a student is not reading on grade level by the end of 3rd grade, they will struggle to access learning that comes after 3rd grade. Another one, our second one is about 3rd grade math. Our 3rd goal is college and career readiness, and our 4th goal is around special education. And for each one of these, you'll see we're very specific. We have a target population of students. We have a way of measuring, and I know that people get uncomfortable around STAR. There are a lot of feelings about the STAR test. We have to have a measurement, and at this time, this is the measurement that we have. There is no requirement that a district use this as a measurement in this form of governance. They could choose other assessments, but at the time, this is what we chose. And so as you're listening to this conversation, and as we are embarking on, because what you'll see in here as well, the lifespan is going to end in August of 2024. So we're starting this process now so that we can create the next generation of goals, and then the superintendent can develop their budgets and strategic plans and actions and all of that around that next generation of goals. And one of those things that can be considered based on community input is, do we want to choose a different assessment, right? Do we want a different focus? Do we want a different assessment? So on and so forth. But we're very specific in what our baseline was, what our target is, as well as the date for completion. Okay. So
Can I ask a
Yes.
clarification on that? So if we did choose a different assessment, but we would still have to do it for state accountability, so they would have just an additional assessment to do?
correct.
Okay.
Legally,
Or the assessment that it's not necessarily an additional assessment. You can use writing portfolios, which our kids work
I
on
see.
already. And it's actually really, really good to have a portfolio by the time you finish college. Because I still have students that kept their what's called a writer's log. And it's like an argumentative essay, different types of essays that they could go back to and reference. And when they were at A&M or Rice or somewhere else, they had a reference, a point of reference, and they built on that instead of having to start all over. Additionally, I mean, we want our kids to think critically, so a writing portfolio is something that, as a teacher and as a mom now, like, I would totally love my son to have by the time he graduates high school.
Okay.
So it's a better way of measuring whether a kid can read or write without. Oh, that's my bias.
Okay.
I'm not an
What is
educator, so
important-
this, like additional ideas would be great to hear.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
there are school districts that have actually done this statewide, and inadvertently their star scores did increase when they stopped focusing so much on the star, just
Right.
the
Right.
star.
What's important about it is that it has to be objective, where it is the exact, every kid, no matter who their teacher is or what building they're in, the assessment is gonna be the same measurement, and so there's not subjectivity
Yeah.
between it. But yes, we are required by law to administer our state assessment, that's federal law, and if we don't, we lose federal dollars.
Right, but when you focus on that in the classroom, that does become a hindrance and takes away from instructional time. So the writing portfolio wouldn't take away from instructional time, it would actually be a more robust use of instructional time.
But then you potentially have the objectivity issue you were mentioning, right? Sort of you have the objectivity issue, right? If
You still have to have
you sort of
objectivity.
had-
Well, you do
Yeah.
have objectivity when you have there's a metric that they use whenever you're a star grader to grade the essays on
I
star
see.
anyway. So
Okay.
that rubric does this comply, does this meet, does it have an idea, does it have a thesis, does it
Okay.
have criticism, blah, blah, blah. So there are ways around it if people just need to get creative.
Okay.
So-
What's important to understand about goals is they need to be focused on an outcome, what a student knows or able to do. They have to have a baseline and a target, they have to have a period of time, and there has to be a clearly defined measure. There are different ways of measure, and it needs to be an area of, like in this case, reading or math, or, it could be science, it could be, it could be a myriad of different things. There are districts that I know that have even gone even more into specificity because they've identified, for example, their African American boys in third grade are their lowest performing population. High impact, high leverage, and those districts have chosen to be very specific on their goal only being about that population of kids, because they know if they can raise that floor, it raises it for all other kids. So we're gonna move on to another objective called constraints. And if goals, student outcome goals are what students know and can do, knowledge and skills, a constraint can be anything. And so earlier when we were talking, other examples of things that a district, making sure the buses run on time, making sure teachers are paid fairly and competitively, and all these other things, that's where that can start to show up. So the goals are these are the things a superintendent must do. And then what we refer to constraints are the things a superintendent cannot do. These are a short list of highly valued things by the community that in the pursuit of accomplishing those goals for children, you cannot violate these values. And I don't wanna dominate, so if you
No,
wanna.
that's fine.
Okay.
I think you cleared it up, so, an example of a constraint, that we've had in the past is the superintendent shall not test, our students more than, once, have a district level assessment more than once a semester. And that's where y'all come in. So if we find that the administration is not honoring that constraint, then the community comes back and tells the board, and the board holds the superintendent accountable. And that's super duper important because we are not in the classrooms, we're not in the hallways, we don't do with the day-to-day operations. So students and community members and parents are super duper important in being able to hold our superintendent accountable. So we need y'all's feedback. As much as we wanna come together, we also need to be able to ensure that we are honoring our words. So, thank y'all for coming. All right, move on.
So in addition to coming up with our next generation of goals, anywhere from 1 to 5, we will also be coming up with our next generation of what we call constraints, which could be anywhere from 1 to 5. And so these are our current constraints. The superintendent shall not allow the district to operate without a system to recruit and employ strong teachers who meet the needs of students needing the most support. The superintendent shall not allow the district to operate without students having effective school-based wraparound support systems. The superintendent will not allow the district to operate without notifying parents and guardians at least once each 12 weeks about how to help their student if their student is 1 or more grade levels behind in literacy. Move your slide down. Hopefully I don't mess it up. Can we do it? The superintendent shall not allow the district to operate without students receiving special education services meeting individual education program progress. And the superintendent shall not allow the district to operate without providing high-quality, full-day pre-kindergarten 3, pre-K 4, and kindergarten programs for all students throughout the district at locations based on data-driven, centralized method for identifying areas of highest need. Now, as an example, you might be wondering, why does it not just say the superintendent shall not allow the district to operate without pre-K? And the reason for that is we want to make sure that that pre-K is high quality, to make sure that kids are getting, and there are research-based best practices. It's not a subjective term. There are research-based best practices that determine quality. Things like student-teacher ratios, training of the teacher, so on and so forth. And then we wanted to make sure we were very specific about the population of kids. And we also wanted to make sure that it wasn't just increasing it in places where we had a lot of empty classrooms to fill, but even in areas where there's high need and demand for pre-K, for example, Gulfton, but maybe we don't have the capacity. And all of these goals and constraints are really about driving system level change. They are supposed to be challenging to the organization while simultaneously being attainable. So they're a stretch.
Sue, can you give me just 1 second?
Of course.
Trustee Dagger. Necesitan traducir, is anybody, Lourdes, quiere que pausemos y
Un poquito, para
Ok.
decir sí, algunas cosas no.
sí. Las metas aquí están para cómo va a cumplir el superintendente, pero los constraints, and y'all can help me with this one.
Restricciones, dijo.
Las restricciones, sí, que no puede ser el superintendente. Por ejemplo, tenemos que tener pre-K, pero pre-K donde tenemos certified teachers, teachers que son certificados y que son que pueden hacer implementar los best practices,
Las mejores prácticas.
prácticas para niños de la edad de 3 y 4 años, y que estos deben de ser en las comunidades que tienen needs,
Necesidades. Sí,
más
necesidades.
necesidades del resto de la comunidad. And for those of you, thank you for bearing with me. I'm practicing my Spanish. I've kind of lost it a little, but we'll get there. All right.
Sí, bien.
The other thing that's important to know about all of these goals and these constraints are they're regularly progress monitored. So, and I always give a very bad example, but it's one that everybody understands, that you have your favorite dress, it's really applies more to women than men, but you have your favorite dress and your friend is getting married this summer and you can't zip your dress anymore. And so you're like, okay, I'm not gonna eat a candy bar every afternoon anymore. And I'm speaking for me and all the Pringles I started eating during COVID. I'm gonna go walking a little bit more. I'm not gonna wait until the day of the wedding to see if my dress can zip. I'm going to, every couple of weeks, I'm gonna make sure that the eating less candy bars and Pringles and increasing my walks are actually helping me zip my dress so I can wear my favorite dress, or no, I need to go buy a new one. So we do the same thing with progress monitoring. We're not gonna wait until the end of the 5 years to see if we've accomplished these goals. We're not even gonna wait until the end of the school year to make sure that our kids are on track to meet those things. So we have a regular cadence, and think of this like actually the better example is a baseball game. You don't wait until the last inning to see who's ahead. And you don't hide the scoreboard in the locker room. You have it visible, you're regularly watching it, who's ahead, who's behind. And so think of this similarly, that we as a board are regularly in meetings every single month. We have either a goal or a constraint, sometimes both, where we're getting a report of where are our kids at this period of time in this area. And then we have a robust conversation of how is the administration, what's working, what's achieving these results if we're on track. And if we're not on track, how is the administration adjusting their inputs, their practices, to make sure that we get on track? For pre-K, hey, we're not on track, so what are we doing to expand capacity or to expand enrollment in those areas where we have capacity but we're not getting kids in the classrooms and we know that they're in the community. So there's this regular cadence of monitoring how our kids are doing to drive that process of continuous improvement.
Y cada mes tenemos una junta de la mesa directiva para ver cómo está cumpliendo las metas o las restricciones el superintendente. Y lo damos por, no cuaresma, quarter. Somebody
Goals are 4 times a year, constraints are what you try to say.
Yeah, so, but I just need to know how to say quarter.
Oh, cada 3 meses.
Cada 3 meses, gracias. Estamos viendo diferente cuál meta o cuál restricción, pero cada mes estamos teniendo la conversación sobre cómo está siendo nuestros estudiantes y que sí estamos poniendo los dólares donde el dinero donde debe de estar con los valores de la mesa directiva para nuestros hijos.
Okay. So the process of developing new goals and constraints begins with robust community engagement and widespread input.
So that the purpose of these meetings, we're having them citywide with trustees from different, like Trustee Dygard and I, we have no overlap. So we want to come out and make sure that I'm listening to Trustee Dygard's community and we are listening to each other's community. We're going to have these conversations and we're going to have our kumbayas and sometimes not, but we will hear from everybody. So it'll be 2 months of meetings with parents, guardians, employees, students, and community members, survey of stakeholders, and root cause analysis and needs assessment by superintendent. So these are the way that we're taking our values in and developing these goals. Vamos a tener 2 meses de juntas con los padres, estudiantes, la comunidad, para ver qué es importante para nuestras comunidades aquí en este lado de Houston y luego por donde vivo yo. Y vamos a tomar en cuenta, tenemos el survey aquí. If you didn't get the survey, please fill it out. This is super duper important, the feedback that we're taking in. And the root cause analysis, lo que está pasando, la causa de lo que está pasando dentro de las comunidades y las escuelas, el superintendente tiene que ver qué es lo que está pasando para poder poner estas metas.
And I think something that's really important to understand, that this school district doesn't belong to us, doesn't belong to the employees. The school district belongs to you guys. You own it. You pay your taxes, these are your children, this is your community. And this work the part that we do of creating these goals and constraints really need to be reflective of the vision and values of the community that owns the district. So that's why we're going through this process. And then there's things like the needs analysis and root cause analysis that, are things that, the district would know that maybe the community wouldn't know of. Gee, I didn't realize this was an area of struggle for the district. Yeah, that makes sense for that to be a goal. And so what we're gonna, and I recognize that the stuff that's in the news, probably raises some questions about all this, but for now, this work is important, no matter who the board is. And we're proceeding until we're told to stop, to make sure that your values are heard in the direction of this district.
And the work never stops.
And the work does not
Never,
stop.
ever stops. We were gonna walk out of here and there will be work to be done, no matter what. So just to piggyback with Trustee Dygard, we just won't stop.
Yeah, the work doesn't change no matter who is sitting at the table. So, there's a QR code, and I think it's on, maybe on what, it's on the handouts as well. There's a QR code that has a questionnaire that I would encourage you to complete. I would encourage you to share, the conversations here today with your neighbors, your friends, your school communities. Encourage them to complete this questionnaire as well. And we're continuing to plan these meetings until, again, if we're ever told we're not your board anymore.
And I can speak on Trustee Dygard's behalf and myself, because we've been working together for quite some time. We started with the work before we were even board members, so
Yeah.
we won't stop. I'm sure we're not gonna stop when, and or if we ever are not board members, so.
And so there's, in theory, there will be more of these meetings, so, if your friends and neighbors were not here today, encourage them to come to future meetings. But now is the really important part, now that you have context for the conversation. We wanna hear your input on all of this, so things like, what opportunities for improvement, and we've got 3 guiding, hey, come in. We've got these 3 guiding questions up here, but, we want to hear your questions, but also, is this like recorded
It's
or?
being recorded now.
So then somebody's capturing their input and,
It's QR code,
so it's only what they type in, it's not what they verbally share.
Right. If they share it verbally.
But we can
How about
also
you do
give feedback verbally.
Okay.
We can listen.
Okay, we can go back and watch all the tapes, okay. So let's just start with what questions you have and any thoughts you have about these 3 comments. I'm gonna close this.
Yes. So I have a question. My son was at school at HISD, and he did not receive proper accommodations for his IEP. So he did receive accommodations, but they weren't really what he needed. For example, he has dyslexia, and he had been in dyslexia since 1st or 2nd grade. And by the time he was in 4th grade, he wasn't getting the right services. So he didn't want to go to dyslexia services anymore because he was grouped with a bunch of kids who just started dyslexia services. So he's on book 12 and they're back on book 3 or whatever for dyslexia. So just because they're checking the box, he's not getting what he needs. So that's a really big problem I see in our district. But also,
It is.
okay.
No, it's a huge problem, and not to interrupt you,
Yeah.
but I'm the learning accommodation specialist on my campus, and what we are seeing is that the elementary schools are not doing their job. They're not doing their due diligence. Whatever they're using, it's inconsistent, because by the time they get to me at middle school, they are still 4 to 5 grade levels below reading, and their dyslexia strategies have not kicked in. They're not able to use them. They don't even know what I'm talking about when I'm going over strategies with them. So it's a huge problem in this district, and as an accommodation specialist, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I feel your frustration.
Well, for us, it was also a bit more challenging because then he didn't want to go to dyslexia anymore because he was like, I'm not the same as these kids. I can read. And you're like, well, you really can't read. And he's like, no, I can read. And these kids are not doing what I can do. So then he's wanting to give up, but he's not where he needs to be. So it was emotionally damaging, but also with his education. Second is you guys have mentioned this goal number or a constraint number 5, where you really want to see the district have more pre-K 3 and pre-K 4 programs, and I would definitely love that. I don't have children that age, and I can see how that will benefit long term. But short term, as someone who wasn't receiving the proper services needed in elementary school, which traditionally is K through 5, what's like, how are we gonna like stretch beyond that? Because we got to get to just our little 6 grades that we're supposed to definitely master before we make 7 or 8 grades.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry, what was your name?
Jennifer Swallen.
Hi, Ms. Wallen. So I couldn't agree with you more when it comes to special education. I don't know if you've ever caught a board meeting, but that is my passion. That I grew into being a board member. And hindsight is 20/20. When I was a teacher, we didn't have special education accommodations, and knowing that our youngest, our most I don't want to say the most vulnerable, the kids that with the greatest need developmentally, with the greatest growth, right? They're not having their needs met. It was extremely disturbing. So what I'm hearing is that the board should create a goal around having an audit of our IEPs and implementation of IEPs, including and not limiting that we are using the best practices, most current practices, but also that fits the needs of the child.
There also needs to be an audit of 504, because I'm the 504 coordinator for dyslexia at my campus, and I run a tight ship.
So special populations
Yes.
and special education where the IEP, like the IEP is an individualized education plan for those of us that aren't familiar with the term. I'm sorry, the acronyms. So that is what I've been fighting for, and I will continue to fight for. But yeah, that is absolutely something that this board I would like to see happen. And it is important that we balance our resources and make sure that we master one craft and develop.
So that's my
While
I'm not saying that we
developing.
shouldn't have grades 3, pre-K 3 and pre-K 4, but I really think we have to master what we currently have and utilize our resources for making these kids starting in kindergarten have what they need to have.
And this, you're exemplifying why we're having these conversations, right? We have 187,000 students in this district, right? So fewer families than that because there are siblings. Different communities, different individuals, different children have different needs, different challenges, different aspirations. And we want to make sure that we are honing in on the ones that have the most widespread community interest as well as the highest impact on children. And so when I listen to your 2 pieces, what I walk away from that, in this bigger context is it's insufficient to just meet the basics of making IEP progress. And remember earlier I was speaking to the example of why some of these seem like hyper specific. It's because we want to hone in on really what the value is and not just, if it's too broad, we're not actually getting at what you're speaking to with the IEPs, right? Or what you're speaking to as well. And so what that informs for me is when we're doing these again, there's some community interest in maintaining something around special ed and IEPs, but maybe it needs more specificity. And that's, again, why we're going through this process. And on pre-K, the more goals and constraints you have, the more diffusion of your resources, right? We have a finite, and that's what you're speaking to, right? Where are we going to prioritize our resources? Now, I hear your point on pre-K 3 and pre-K 4, but there's also a vast array of evidence that that is how we get kids more successful. Like the dollar for dollar investment in pre-K has a greater ROI in kindergarten through 6th grade, which then frees up intervention dollars for other things in those grades. So it's kind of, when you're choosing to make an investment, it can have a greater ROI than a lot of other things in the terms of the bigger accomplishments of reading, writing, college, and career readiness. But the general point is, this is why we're doing this, because there are going to be differences of ideas and opinions, and we need to make sure we're hearing them all and building
I
them
do
into
wanna
a
say,
whole.
Ms. Wallen, like, on behalf of, a teacher, I am still a teacher, I'm sorry that your son did not get what he needs, because the worst thing that we can do for our kids is make them feel like failures, and make them feel like they can't. Because it doesn't matter whether you're in 3rd grade or 6th grade, if you feel like you can't do it, and that's what you internalize, you don't do it. And that's what I'm hearing here, and sometimes these goals,
But I know he's not the only one.
He's
And I
not
know
the
that
only
he's not
one.
a small
He's not.
percentage.
Yep.
Dyslexia services, I don't know how many kids are affected by dyslexia.
We have a lot, and we have a lot that
But-
have not been identified.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
And that's
so
the
to
problem.
me, it's just, I would like for us to just focus on what we have to do versus adding more to it. And I really feel like adding pre-K 3 and pre-K 4, I'm all for it. If we were meeting all these other goals, if all these kids were getting the services they needed, I would say, yeah, add it on.
well, Ms. Wallen, I'm glad that you're bringing this point up. I'd love to, I have your feedback because, there's tons of research out there, and like I teach my students, you look at the sources, where are you getting your research from? And when kids get too much of something, they shut down as well. So we need these conversations, and each board member gets one vote, and that's how that goes. So, like I said, special education is near and dear to my heart, and that is something that I would love to see a robust overhaul on how we do things. There was a cap, I'm sure y'all know, by the state of Texas, a couple years back, and I don't think we've ever bounced back from that. And I will continue to make those efforts, so.
And I just want to emphasize for clarity, we're not in a position, first of all, it's not our role to problem solve the operations of the district. Our intent here tonight is to hear the vision and values of the community so that we can use that input to create the next generation of goals and constraints. So let's,
And this goes to the goal. So talking about literacy being 3 or more grade levels below, because we're at that. I have kids that are still on a 1st grade reading level. I have kids that have a specific learning disability in reading. They're in 8th grade and they're measuring pre-primer. That's unacceptable. And for my part, I see that we have a lot of teachers that are not trained well enough to understand the IEP or what that disability is. Because right now I've been working with a teacher that never read the plaque. Didn't know what her kids were diagnosed with. She just went straight to the accommodations and did them, but didn't know why she was doing it, and therefore didn't always supply the accommodations, that's a federal no-no. You can't do that. That's a non-negotiable. But I see too that at the state level too, they're not doing their due diligence. I think they could take a lesson from colleges and College Board at how tests are administered, because when a child has an oral accommodation, it's not just questions and answers being read. College Board, when they register for the SAT, the ACT, and the PSAT, they get a pre-recorded audio and it is fully read to them.
What was your name again, sorry?
Mila Fogarty. I am the dyslexia specialist and 504 coordinator for dyslexia at Pershing.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rory. I
Now you're working in Pershing.
agree.
Yes.
My son is there.
Oh,
That
okay.
is good. 6.
Okay. Cool. He might not have come across my classroom. And just to tell you, we have 5 levels. So if we're following the reading by design, and I understand that they're trying to phase out the basic language skills from NIHouse because it's book 1, book 2, book 3, and you can have kids that are high-low in either of those classes. We actually have to administer a mastery check that is a placement test. And that placement test tells me diagnostically if this child has met the criteria to be in a certain level. So I have 8 kids in level 1. My classes are about to max out now because we keep getting transfers. but I've got 8 in level 1, 8 in level 2.
Excuse me, so if we were building, so goals and guardrails,
Yes.
right, or goals and constraints, so what I'm hearing so far is goal around special ed
Yes.
is
Teacher
is a
professional
priority.
development.
Yes, teacher professional
professional
development, and it needs
development.
to be more than just those stupid videos that we have to watch every year for compliance
Okay,
because
so
they get
I'm
their
hearing,
friends to take their
I'm hearing effective.
Yes, we need effective teacher professional
Effective.
development.
And tailored to needs,
Yes.
right? So effective around special ed, maybe effective around other areas.
Exactly.
Student, and sorry, I have really bad handwriting.
So adaptive would be like,
Student need tailored.
I don't know if it's more adaptive. It really needs
Okay.
to center. I guess it needs to be more effective where a teacher truly understands the individual education plan. That they can't leave out parts of it. So when the SPED department chair, the case manager, gives them their IEPs, that they read it fully and they understand that that PLAF statement gives them all of the background knowledge that they need to have about that student, where they're coming from, what their diagnosis is.
well, like Miss Wallet, so
Right.
her son, how could we, I don't wanna say group, but how the diagnostic would be administered and then placement would be, I'm just trying to
So
find
more
the right.
effective diagnostics.
I would
know,
say
the
that
diagnostics
district
that they
needs
use is
more
good.
effective, just teachers.
They
to
need more
teach the
effective teachers.
program. So
Okay.
that's what I noticed is the biggest problem.
All right,
We don't
so-
have the
and-
teachers or the
and-
staff.
So we're just trying to capture big buckets.
Yeah.
Okay, we're trying to identify high need, and it can be specific, but also, again, we don't get to decide what the PD is,
Right.
but we can set the value
Right.
of making sure that the PD is effective to the student need.
So
Right.
they definitely need more effective PD in child find and being able to identify flags so that they can submit, as soon as they see it, they can notify the appropriate people on campus so we can start setting up IAT meetings and get them tested. I'm just gonna say, for example, I have a 7th grader and she was brought to me in tears. Her words were I can't read. Miss, I can't read. And she's crying. And she wouldn't go to class because the trauma is so great because she's humiliated in her classes. She is English speaking. They are Hispanic, but Spanish is not spoken in the home. So there's been no ESL. When I did my QPS screener from Texas A&M, 0 decoding skills. So that means she can't read. She can't read anything. She can't understand what's being taught to her in math, science, social studies, doesn't matter. She can't get it. So we need to be able to have more effective, we need to have teachers that are trained better. The
Okay.
professional development has to be better surrounding
Okay.
to identify special needs.
So is there anything I have not captured in this point here? So I've got,
Can I add something really quickly? So
we're not,
teacher professional development, conducive to like a learning environment, because you said like we have to be specific too, because those
Yeah.
online videos are terrible.
and that's, yeah. Okay, and teacher effectiveness generally, so, yes ma'am.
I can add, I don't have a lot of experience with SPED, but I went on behalf of our high school to a SPED meeting. Everybody from many different schools said, I don't know how you put this in that list of goals, but the classroom teachers need to be better educated in
Yes.
identifying when a kid needs SPED services.
That's what I was trying to say.
Well,
They need to understand those flags. They need to be able to
Right,
catch them.
I will say, like having 38 kids in a classroom,
It's hard.
you can't, that you probably won't catch that until like in November. That our kids, some kids are failing in this area or can't do this or can't do that. And it also depends on your subject matter, like, anyway, yes, I'm right there with
But
you.
if you have 38 kids in a classroom, then why are you going for a pre-K 3 and a pre-K 4?
Okay, okay.
That's a whole different animal.
I know, but I'm just trying to
No, sí.
Sí, lo que dice la señora sí tiene mucha razón porque mi hijo le falta un poco en matemáticas y luego él le pregunta al maestro, pero él siente que el maestro no le importa. O sea, no le importa si saca un grado o si le entiende o no entiende. sea, y nada más eso es lo que se tiene que hacer y ya. Si lo pudo hacer, qué bueno, y si no lo pudo hacer, no importa.
So she's
What-
saying that,
Oh,
What the,
In
what the lady's
mathematics.
saying is that whoever talked before, it's correct because my son in the class, seems that the teacher doesn't care of how his development goes because that's the feeling that I have.
No recuerdo cómo se llama.
So,
Okay.
So SPED,
Es que no
is there
sé,
anything we
ella
haven't
me dijo que era su-
other thoughts in
so what I'm
addition to
hearing is
SPED that
like
we haven't?
smaller class sizes is something that a goal could be for the district, smaller class
Estaba
sizes.
tutor y no la conocí.
so I have two kids, one in public, one in private. And the biggest difference, in my opinion, is in private, the teachers are valued more. They're treated as professionals, and they're not shoved with 38 kids in a classroom, ever. Ever. That would never happen.
We don't have 38 kids in a classroom in elementary school.
Okay, well, even in middle school. It's not
That's
gonna.
what we do.
In a middle school, I mean, I have one in middle school, and those are some very instrumental years, and they're hard to manage as just a human being. I can't imagine a teacher having to manage 38 of them.
So smaller class sizes is
It
a
has to
value.
happen.
Okay.
There's no way a teacher
What-
can effectively say, I'm a professional and I do this job very well, and I went to college and I was trained, and then I worked in a class size of 40, 38,
Yeah.
40 students.
Yep.
You're not helping the kids, you're not helping the teacher, you're
So
not
what are-
serving the students.
What other values, goals, are not reflected here? Who have we not heard from? What other thoughts are there in the room? Because I want to make sure, I see a little baby over there, thank you for being here. In addition to these things, what other values, goals are on your hearts and minds?
I think curriculum is important.
Okay?
When we purchase curriculum and introduce it and it doesn't make allowances for students with accommodations, we've got a problem.
Okay.
And I have a serious problem with this math program.
Okay, so
It's great for
curriculum-
GT kids. If
Okay,
you are GT,
It's wonderful,
it's wonderful.
but if you're not.
so curriculum differentiation by need.
Yes.
Okay,
Carnegie.
all right, what else?
¿Qué otra cosa?
So I'd like to piggyback off of Jennifer, if it's treat teachers like professionals, I don't know how we could make that into a goal, but I would like to piggyback off of that.
I think it's a huge goal, because when you value your teachers, they're gonna value the students so much more.
Where have you been all my life? Come out to
No,
a
I've
board
been
meeting.
around, I did,
Yo quiero preguntar algo, por ejemplo, si en las escuelas tienen recursos para apoyar al estudiante en casa, nosotros los papás, para que pueda tener mejor eficiencia en la materia donde necesita ayuda.
Como la tutoría, como...
Tutoría como material que mandan para casa, porque bueno, yo vengo de otro estado, yo
Ajá.
estuve en Chicago
Ajá.
y yo también trabajé como asistente de maestra en algunas escuelas, trabajé con niños de autismo y también en salones regulares.
Ajá.
Entonces, mi hijo necesitaba ayuda para lectura y escritura, pero ahí había materiales de apoyo en la escuela que se los daban a los niños. O sea, por ejemplo, a mi hijo en particular, yo hablo de mi hijo en particular, y ya yo me ponía con él en casa a estudiar, o sea, como tarjetas, libros, ajá, o sea, como material de trabajo. Y cada mes tenía una reunión con la maestra de educación especial para ver el avance de mi hijo.
Okay, so what she's saying is she was a special education aide in Chicago, and what she would like to see is have resources where our students could take home and parents could teach or learn how to help their child at home. And so this could be for a number of different special populations.
Yes.
So whether it's GT or special education or ESL, and that she would have monthly meetings with her son's teacher to make sure that, to check in and see how he's doing.
Sí, había una maestra que era maestra de educación especial, más aparte estaba la maestra de su clase de él.
Okay, so
O sea,
co-teachers.
yo tenía la ayuda con la maestra de educación especial porque él requería ayuda en el área de lectura, escritura. Entonces hacíamos una meta nosotros y cada mes nos sentábamos para ver el progreso de mi hijo. Y mi hijo iba avanzando porque la maestra de la clase, ella pensó que mi hijo necesitaba ir a una escuela especial con niños así que tenían dislexia, cosas así. Y yo le dije que no, que yo creía que mi hijo no estaba así, o sea, como ella me decía, que pusiéramos una meta para poder trabajar. Y mi hijo siempre estuvo en un salón regular y hasta la fecha. Pero fue porque también nosotros como papás conocemos las capacidades y vemos las necesidades de nuestros hijos,
Sí.
más de cerca que un maestro en la escuela.
So she's
Entonces
saying that
buscamos recursos para apoyar.
as a parent, she knew what her child needed. She worked closely with the special education teacher to set goals for her child, and every month she would go in and work specifically with special education. So it was a partnership more than anything else.
But they don't have time for a partnership.
So,
Just saying.
so home resources and parent support.
It's a great
So-
idea.
It is.
I want to recenter us.
Hold on.
Yeah.
She had her hand up.
Okay.
She had her hand up.
Sorry, just wanted to point out a kind of a trade-off with the smaller class sizes, because I don't want to compromise the enrichment beyond core. And so, for example, if a principal has to decide, okay, maybe we have to have another math teacher or another ELAR teacher instead of a theater teacher or a choir teacher. So it's that balance of, yes, if we have smaller core classes, it may cost us in enrichment. And so we have to think about
So,
that.
okay, so we had a goal in the past, or the board had a goal in the past to educate the whole child, and there were that could be in a constraint, actually. Superintendent shall not allow the principal to remove the theater, art, and music teacher.
I mean, I don't know. I don't want to take away
No.
flexibility.
No,
but
yeah. So, but that's,
But it shouldn't. And so what we have found this year for us, it's been a budget issue. So when student enrollment went down, we lost part of our dollars for students, and they made us ship off
But
teachers to other campuses.
this is
so.
why we do the constraints, right? So those goals, we're saying, in the case of our current ones, non-negotiable. 3rd grade reading, 3rd grade math, college career readiness, special ed. However, Mr. Superintendent, you cannot, in the process of achieving those goals, allow these other things to happen. You can't, in the process of making sure that our special ed kids are fully served above and beyond just meeting the basic legal requirement, do your budget in such a way that we lose enrichment classes and increase our class sizes, right? And that's his job to then figure out, and then we're monitoring the progress. So I want to center us back around goals, what students know and can do. And so I'm gonna try and reframe it, and I keep looking back to the mom with the baby. I know that all of you have kids, but it's a very wonderful reminder of why we're here. What are your hopes and dreams for your kids? When your kids leave HISD, or even just fast forward 5 years, what do you want your kids to know and be able to do? Knowledge and skills. Let's try and reframe it in that way a little bit, right? We know we've got a lot of challenges. We know things are not going well. But let's start by just chasing our dreams of what we aspire to for our kids, of what they know and can do. And then we'll circle back to, but what do we want them to, the superintendent, to not do in pursuit of these aspirations? Are you guys okay trying the conversation a little differently? Okay. And I think I saw a hand up somewhere
did.
here. Okay.
So, for me, I have 2 different children.
Uh-huh.
I want, one of them needs to have a skill set of, I don't have to go to college. Like,
Okay.
it would be great if he goes to college, but he needs to have a skill set. And I think the schools that are offering skill sets to students in high school, it's a huge selling point. Whether it's carpentry or something really highly specialized, something that, yes, I want them to go to college, for sure. But if they have a skill set and go to college, they're an entrepreneur.
I had
Okay,
a student
so-
of mine, she was cosmetology, paid her way through college.
Exactly. So I think it's very important that the district you know, put money into skill set positions too.
So does this sum up what I heard you say?
Yes.
Okay, great. What else? What other hopes and dreams do you have for your kids?
Just to piggyback on that is that when I'm a product of HISD, I graduated in 1984 from Sharpstown High School, and we had wood shop, metal shop. We had the DECA program, so kids that were going on a business track, they could be registered for college prep or they could be registered for business. And DECA would put them through the business track, and they would have the electives that went along with that. They were the ones that maybe were gonna go to a 2-year college. They weren't gonna go to a 4-year university. And then you had those students who probably weren't gonna go to college, but they could learn a trade. And then they could be that entrepreneur. And so I think that we've done our students a disservice by eliminating the idea of having a work-study program at the high school level so that they are prepared for the real world, because not everybody is going to succeed at college if they go to college. You know, my daughter has friends, they went to private school, and 2 of them have already dropped out of college, so.
So what I'm hearing in that is making sure there are post-secondary pathways that don't require students to go to college.
Right.
Right? And this would be a value, not a goal, a guardrail, is making sure, and I just use this as an example, but making sure that it is something that is more robust than just taking one class.
Yes.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Okay? What other hopes and dreams do you have for your kids? Sorry, I didn't mean to. You're looking at me, I have to answer.
Pues que los niños, o sea, que se escuche la voz de los niños también. Para
Student
mí-
voice, that student voice is heard.
Okay?
Sí, porque los maestros, o sea, a veces no escuchan pues la necesidad que tiene el niño.
So
O
the
sea,
ability
como yo
for,
le decía hace rato, a veces los niños necesitan ayuda en cierta materia o en cierto tema que están desarrollando en clase.
so a safe space for our students to be able to articulate their needs where they are not dismissed by the adult.
Y entender de que todos los niños son diferentes. Unos niños aprenden muy rápido y a otros niños les cuesta mucho trabajo aprender.
And our children learn at different paces. Some children get it immediately, some take a little while to get it, but they'll get it.
Entonces, no tratar a todos los niños por igual, como si todos los niños fueran muy inteligentes. Porque a veces es lo que pasa con los maestros, que piensan que porque un niño ya es inteligente, todos ya captaron lo que ese niño captó.
So,
Not to
not-
treat the kids the same
Yes.
way, yeah, but to realize that they're all different and their learning capabilities are different as well.
Different needs.
Therefore, teachers have to be aware of that.
So,
Differentiation could be better.
what I think I'm hearing in summation for this one is in the pursuit of the goals, right? We wanna make sure that student voice is heard, valued, and incorporated. Not just, oh, we had a meeting for them, but we listened, we heard, we based our decisions, or let those student voices influence our decisions.
well, she's saying more at a classroom level, not necessarily at the board level, because for the teachers to be able to hear the needs. So
But
again, that would go back to smaller class sizes if I wanted to hear.
Es que yo siento que a veces
So is
los
this
maestros
just in the-
ignoran que ese
in the
niño
classroom?
necesita una ayuda especial, entonces siguen dando su clase como todos los días normal y lo van dejando y ese niño se va atrasando.
She's just saying that when
Uh-huh.
teachers can't hear the needs of the student, that they just keep falling further and further behind.
Okay.
Como por
So
ejemplo,
can you
como por
clarify
ejemplo,
our-
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
maybe-
what I'm saying.
the
maybe-
red flags,
yeah.
being able to identify those
Yeah.
special needs, to be able
Yeah.
to have smaller classes so we can be more attentive to their needs.
Déjeme darle un ejemplo, mi hijo necesita ayuda ahorita en matemáticas y nosotros lo estamos ayudando en casa, pero en la escuela el maestro realmente no le interesa. O sea, si él pasa o reprueba ese grado no le importa. Así.
So she's saying that, that they're trying to help her son out at home, with math, but she feels that the teacher doesn't care, and whether he passes or fails, it's just kind of, he's being dismissed by the teachers, so.
So I'm going to come back over to this. What I hear is an aspiration that your child effectively learns math,
Yes.
right? And in the process of learning math,
What did you say?
and in the process of learning math,
Uh-huh.
making sure that your child's voice is heard and valued and incorporated in the classroom by their teacher to understand the differentiation of student need. And I say,
What was your name again? I'm sorry.
Aisha?
Aisha?
Yes.
Oh, your hand was raised?
Yes, so around the hopes and dreams, I don't know if this qualifies, but I know when I was growing up, I still remember these amazing teachers that I had, just that you think of as mentors, really. I mean, obviously as a child, you don't understand that, but you know, you think back now and I can think of Mr. Hadio, Mr. Wallace, like I can just rattle them off. And I would love for my child to have that experience where, you know, like she has these teachers every day that are just sort of mentors, amazing people for her to look up to and model herself after. I don't know if that's a hope and dream or if that's something else, but.
so the hopes and dreams, the goals are what your students know and can do,
I see, okay.
right? But what,
Build relationships, I think that they can build, and
Yeah.
that's socializing, and it's also having teachers.
Have a positive
Yeah.
impact.
Yeah.
A teacher needs
Yeah.
to have, I always
Yes.
told my daughter when she was growing up, you can make or break a child. And it's up to you to be able to establish that rapport with that child and with that parent. My parents know I have their back and I have their kids' back. So it's about having that relationship. And I remember my teachers that were my mentors. And I remember 2 teachers who made my life a living hell and didn't have to be. So, you know, you do remember those teachers.
Right, so those relationships and the socialization inside of the classroom is contingent upon, again, the number of students you have, because I can't be everywhere for 38
Yes,
children at
yes.
one time.
And
Maybe
all
they're
we're
all
building-
38 GT students.
But even
No,
so, you
not
can't
even.
have that growth that you could normally have if you have 180 essays. I can only grow you so
Right,
much.
Right.
If I don't have time to grade, if I don't have time to call your parents, if I don't have a relationship with you, if I can't tell you when you're doing right, that yay, when you're doing wrong, let's get it together, right? So it's just, it's still, 38 is a lot.
And for you guys as a board, you have to understand too that all of this you can't put into, you cannot compartmentalize. That was the word I was looking for. All of these are interdependent on one another. If you've got a teacher in there who has been trained well, has established a relationship, they're gonna be able to motivate that student. The student's gonna have buy-in. But you also, that mutual respect has to come. And that comes from being trained well, going into the classroom, having content knowledge, knowing your students, and then building that relationship, because every single one of those things up there is interdependent. You cannot compartmentalize.
so here's the thing, we could articulate, let's throw away everything we've already talked about, and we could say, superintendent, you have to do, and I'm already, you know, this whole list of things that this educator in our district has shared with us, she's spot on, you need to do this, 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 and this. We have to have a way of monitoring and measuring it, right? And really, we're at the 30,000 foot level. And so it really, the administration, the superintendent, and this is the part we didn't include in this. This is what the superintendent is held accountable to by the board, is the goals and the constraints and the progress towards them. A superintendent cannot, if they are aspirational but achievable, if they're challenging but attainable, a superintendent's not going to be able to attain those aspirations for children within the constraints if they don't do all the right stuff that's scaffolded and vertically aligned. So we're not going to tell you in the special ed department how to do your 504 at the board level. That's going to come somewhere in here, but it's going to be reflected back up here. Did the superintendent lead the organization effectively to accomplish this? And if he is not, or they, he, she, they, are not leading it effectively, they're not going to accomplish that goal. And especially if we're writing them in a way that is thoughtful, that has enough specificity that it isn't, I mean, the wraparound services goal or constraint, right? 800% improvement, that's not challenging, that was filling quotas. So we realized we were not specific enough. So we're now working on revising those to be more specific, to actually drive the changes that we want.
I'd like to put a
Intended drive.
constraint then. I would like that the intention, the superintendent shall not, shall honor the intent of, like, the spirit of the constraint, like, it's like you, that, it's like.
It's how we
that-
write it, it's how we
Well,
write
that's
it.
what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's, that's implied in how we write it, sorry, honey.
No, not always.
If we're doing it effectively, it is, and that's where we
Mr. Chen?
struggle.
So I have a question in regards to the board goals as you're going through and doing these specific sessions. Are you revising, or are you trying to create better constraints on the 4 goals that you have in hand?
It's gonna be a consensus, so whatever the community decides as a whole, like what I'm hearing a lot of from every other, like, community meeting, that special education is on the forefront, special education and teacher, treating teachers like the professionals that they are, giving them effective professional development. These are things that are coming up continuously.
Right, but usually for board goals, when they're written for public education, we have to remember that they have to be smart.
Right, all the goals being developed are smart, and generally, you don't try to do more than 4 to, as Sue said, the more we spread this out, we only have a finite amount of the pie in terms of resources. The question then becomes, how do we do this? And all these talking points we've, in this room, are really important. I mean, I had a child who was SPED, and I had to exit them out of HISD as well. But then, as everyone knows, I've been very involved here. So my question becomes is, as we're talking about these things, how is it that you can write these specific points in your constraints such that they still honor what we've talked about this evening? And that, to me, is more constraints than the goals.
Well, that's twofold, like, that we have, that's the board itself, and we also have a board coach that is helping us, that is Lone Star Governance certified, and like we said, like, the superintendent, these are your goals, these are the constraints, you have to carry it out. You are the community, you're telling us what you want from us, and we're gonna have to figure it out. So, I understand what you're saying, that there's a finite number of dollars, and how are we gonna spread this thin, blah, 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 but again, you put your money where its values are, and your return on investment, the greatest indicator of student success is the instruction that they receive in the classroom from a quality teacher. So that is the number one thing. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. Like, the more effective teacher that you have, the more our students learn. And ultimately, that's we're in the business of educating children. I know it's 6:41. We're 11 minutes past due.
Can I say something
Thank you so much.
real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm the principal here at Challenge Early College High School, and with the goals of the district, working backwards, then you bring them to the school. With the school, we have to do the school improvement plan. Not a school is the same, it's not the same shoe. I worked at Sterling High School, I worked at Lamar High School, I worked at Advanced Virtual Academy, a school for dropouts. I worked at Fraga, and now I'm here. But I empower you to visit with the school and don't give up, and reach out to school officials, and the district also has a parental support to help the parents. But with the school, we have a plan that is, we know the goals, and it has to be aligned to the goals of the district. But then again, we also, each school has their needs of how many special ed, how many GTs, to make sure that.
But I went to a school that didn't have a lot of special ed. I went to a school that's probably 70% GT.
But we still
My
have to-
son did, and
we
he
still
couldn't get the services he needed.
We still have to
So I'm like,
that students.
what was the
Okay,
breakdown?
so I want to address Andy, and then I'm going to come back to that. So to your question about, what I'm hearing is fundamentally what next? How do you take all of this? So we're doing a series of community meetings. There have been several that have already happened. God willing, there will be more. And we will take all of this feedback that we are hearing from the surveys, from these meetings, and we will then draft with our coach the next generation of goals and constraints. Some of them might be the same. What we might hear is, don't get rid of that one. That one is too valuable to keep. I'm also hearing maybe some of them aren't as high on the list. Maybe some of them we are steadily meeting already, and those systems have been put in place that they will just sustain without being monitored. And the board owns the creation and collaboration with the community of the goals and the constraints. The superintendent and his staff then writes the progress measures for each one of these goals and constraints. And the board then has to decide, do we think those progress measures actually meet the requirements that we had in mind, that we heard from the community, the values and vision that we heard from the community behind them? And if they don't, and we're literally going through this right now on our goal 2 for wraparound services, we're like, you know what? That actually isn't the spirit of what we wanted. We weren't specific enough. And then the board doesn't rewrite that progress measure for the superintendent. The board either the superintendent can revise the progress measure themselves, or it's incumbent on us to refine the language to create more specificity. But before we finalize all of these, we will be drafting them, and then we will be bringing them back out to the community to say, we believe that based on what we heard in this very huge, very diverse district, that the predominant things we heard were these goals and these constraints. Doesn't mean that there aren't other things that the community valued that we're ignoring, but these were the predominant things that highest need, highest impact, highest community ownership around, that we're gonna come to consensus as a board is our focus.
Yeah, like for example, the fine arts thing was a goal that we heard a lot last time, but never made it to the on our goals. We heard from 176 students that wanted fine arts as a goal, and it didn't make it. And just to give you some context, like fine arts helps with the whole child, the social emotional needs, the socialization. For students with disabilities, music is an outlet, and you have to have that. So that would have kind of touched, to your point, Andy, like all of that money, like their finite resources, you could have touched different educational outcomes with that one goal, but it didn't make it. So you have to hold whomever is up here, whether it's us as trustees, what's a new, whatever, whomever, you cannot stop holding our feet to the fire. Like it just has to happen. Like there are people that we just have to listen to the community more, and that's why I'm gonna leave it on there.
You had something else that you wanted to share, Jennifer?
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
I have a question for you guys. And based on what we heard tonight, we all agree that we need the smaller classes.
Okay.
So we can get better education for our kids.
Okay.
And we all agree that we need the teachers to be more effective at the time that they're teaching to our kids.
Okay.
But my question here is, what is gonna be the resources we're gonna give or better prepared teachers for them to better educate our kids? Because on base of the statistics that we've been heard recently after all the COVID and the pandemic, we all agree that our kids, instead of moving forward with all our online education and all the new gadgets and tablets and laptops, they went backwards instead of moving forward on education. So I want to know what would be the budget and how we're gonna spend the money, and what is gonna be the resources that we're gonna get out of the budget, and if we all agree or kids didn't move forward during the pandemic,
So what can I interject? So what I'm hearing is there needs to be a root cause analysis on the effectiveness of technology within the classroom and at home. So we have, how much was Power Up? Like 175 million, 125 million the first year rollout and so forth. What is our return on investment? Like investment on that price tag, right? Like how are we using technology effectively? And or if we are using, so the root cause analysis maybe on,
That's not really,
remember, we said that we're out here and we're listening
I
and we
know,
have to bring
so
it
I'm
back
trying
to
to
the
figure out,
community.
that's not a student outcome goal, so it doesn't go over here. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase, you know, what it would be as a constraint. But what I actually think I hear in there is a core tenet of this work, is that student learning, effective student learning, is a priority for resources. Is a first priority for resources. Am I hearing, would that be a correct understanding of what I think is underlying your question?
Yeah, on a way, yeah, but more than that, I want to know, because I'm really concerned about, like, you know, we during COVID, we spent so much money, so like millions, on resources that didn't give us nothing on.
So you can't put it like.
Audit
Oh,
of
very
resource
little.
effectiveness.
No,
Yeah.
I'm saying nothing,
Yeah.
but very little on
Yeah.
you know,
Agreed.
education, like pure education to our kids.
Okay, so here's then how, because my brain works in goals and constraints, and for those of you who really want to deep dive geek out on this, because there will be more of these conversations, whether or not we're leading them, there will be more of these conversations, and I'll probably lead them no matter what, because I like having these conversations, and Elizabeth likes having these conversations too, and I don't anticipate that Elizabeth is gonna just go sit at home. So there is a rubric or framework called Lone Star Governance. It is research-based best practices for governance behavior that have been aligned with improving of student outcomes. And it is put in a framework so that we can monitor our own behaviors as adults. You know, we think we're spending our time focused on student learning outcomes, but are we, right? How much time do we spend on the last quarter, right? It's to set that kind of thing up. Well, part of that framework says that the goals within the constraints, that the goals are the first priority for resources. So what I hear you saying, and again, I'm inferring to try and translate it into a constraint, is that might look like an audit of resource allocation for effectiveness in achieving the student learning goals, right? Did those tablets actually increase third grade reading, third grade math, college readiness, special ed? And if they didn't, we should be spending those resources on something else that will. And we can be specific about it as a constraint, but it is also theoretically part of our governance practice of progress monitoring, that at these regular intervals when we're monitoring our goals and constraints, for us to know, the administration said that their strategy is going to be giving every kid a laptop. Well, but the kids aren't on track. So is that the right strategy, or are you shifting to a different strategy that will achieve the goal, right? We have those opportunities multiple times a year for those conversations, and the biggest time of year is literally right now. All of our budget meetings are, you can sit at your house with your baby and watch them on your computer, and see the conversations we're having, and they should be centered around what are the needs of the students, how are we doing on the goals, how are we honoring the values of the community on the constraints, and why are we allocating these dollars in this way instead of that way, based on what the data is telling us.
That is absolutely correct, because, you know, no matter if we spend more money on getting more rooms or more room classes, for us to get smaller classes, or to spend money on preparing our teachers better, if the resources that they're gonna get, they're not gonna have the impact on for them to use those tools to teach our kids better.
You're
you
right.
know, so we'll be like, I mean, on a dead end. I mean, we're spending the money, but we're still not spending the money on the right tools that we need.
You want us to be able to demonstrate effectiveness. And so I think as a community value, if we want to codify that into our policy through this process, that would show up as audit of resource effectiveness.
Or deploying technology, you know, in the most impactful way for students or something like that, not just sort of.
Yeah, there should be
Yeah.
a curriculum surrounding like technology, like a developmental, like we had 3 and 4-year-olds on a laptop who were running around, like who gives that to a 4-year-old? Like that's ridiculous. But anyway, okay, I want to thank everybody so much for making it out tonight. It was a really, really wonderful conversation and great to hear. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you as you're trying to get us out of here. I have a couple basic questions. Is it our high school PTO, we have a pretty active community board. May I post this?
Yes, please.
Okay, and then in my explanation.
If you give me your email, I can send it to you electronically if
Oh,
you want
thank
to
you.
share it with them
Okay,
electronically.
that'd be great.
So before you leave, give me your email and I can.
That would be great, thank you, I will. And then these goals and these constraints, I guess I'm doing that backwards, these are for the district for the next 5 years.
No.
This is what we have until August of 2024.
You are working on crafting goals
For the next.
through 2029? Or do
Yes.
these, how often do these get
Every
turned
5
over?
years.
Okay, there, thank you. I think that allows me to go back to my community and explain this, thank you.
These will expire in spring of 2024.
Okay,
So they expire in a year. This is about the next 5 years.
okay, thank you.
Question?
Yo solamente tengo un comentario que en las de Dreams o Hubs que los niños que se enfocaran más en lectura y en matemáticas porque no tiene lo que yo he notado con mis hijos que por ejemplo las maestras le dicen no pues haz 30 minutos de los en un track o algo así y vas a ganar un premio. Entonces cuando yo voy con mis hijos y les pregunto de qué fue el objetivo de la lectura o cuál es el punto importante, no saben nada y nada más lo hacen como que no tienen no analizan, no tienen una buena retención en matemáticas y lectura, que pienso que es lo más importante para en el futuro.
So she's saying solid instruction for math and English, that they're using technology just to kind of supplement, that's supplementing the actual instructional part. They're doing it for points or for reward as opposed to actual authentic learning. So she would like to see her children learn authentically and be able to think critically, so that way we can have independent, creative and critical thinkers in society.
I shouldn't just be doing it for a treat.
Right.
Okay.
Sticker charts are great, but they don't work when you need to pay the bills. All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns, points to ponder? Yes.
Just the next meeting, it needs to be like on the Twitter, on your Instagram.
No disagreement from me there.
Because this was not easy
Oh,
to
I
navigate
know.
because it only came on my phone and I'm not,
I
we get a
150%
lot of
agree.
calls. And then just the signage to even find the room, it would have been nice just to have one sign on the door.
Well, thank you so much. We will take all of that into
Thanks,
consideration and articulate the needs for the next meeting. Again, thank y'all so much for coming out. I'm gonna excuse myself. I do have a meeting at 6:30.
Jennifer, I'm real sore about that. And I had, it turned into.
What's your name?
Aisha.
Me getting very angry this afternoon when I realized.
Susan Hawes.
Nice to meet you.
Gracias.
How old are you?